We're gonna get started here.
Good afternoon. It's so wonderful to see you all. We're joined by a number of colleagues here at the University of Minnesota. And we're grateful to see so many of you online. And today, I get the pleasure of introducing Dr. Diele Lobo. My name is Melissa Kenny. I'm the Director of Research at the University of Minnesota's Institute on the Environment. And I was, I think, the first mentor for the synthesis postdoc fellows as part of the Midwest CASC. And for those of you that are newer to the Midwest CASC, the idea of synthesis postdocs was one of the innovations that really helped our collaborative institutional team across our 9 institutions win the bid. And the concept is that there's a lot of really great work that's going on, but sometimes what's needed is not new data collection, but what is needed is a synthesis of data in new ways that help us to be able to understand that things that are important to both address critical natural resource management problems, as well as understand the state of adaptation in the Midwest region. And so the first project that was conceptualized as part of the Midwest CASC is a project that Dr. Lobo led, which is focused on really understanding the state of adaptation planning within the Midwest region as it relates to natural resource management. Now, as the first postdoctoral fellow for the Midwest CASC, she had some tremendous challenges, including really wrestling some important questions with data management and how to structure the data sets in order for us to be able to do replicable research that we could create like longitudinal studies from years after she finished a study, as well as building relationships. So much of data is relationships and understanding what is and is not included. And one of the things that I really appreciate about Dee is she really takes a people first approach to her work and really centered key relationships as part of what she did. So I won't give away any punchlines, that's for Dee to do, but as you look through that, I just want you to keep those 2 things in mind, because that's a lot of work that goes into doing this research well and with integrity. And when we think about some of the like AI models and data sets, just think about all the people that are behind it, all of the work that's happening in the region, and also the data stewardship to be able to manage this over many years. Dee, we're really proud of you and we're really excited to hear more about your project.
Great, thank you so much, Melissa. Thank you all for being here. It's a joy to be finally be here presenting those findings. Can you all hear me online? I don't know how to check, but hopefully you all are. Where else? Oh yeah, so it's a joy to be here presenting this to you all. I want to start acknowledging those amazing people that are part of the project and supported the project at different capacity. Melissa is my supervisor mentor, but probably you all know Jessica, Lucinda, Kim, Paul, Ben, Rob, and Stephen. All of them played an important role in supporting me and shaping the ideas of this project. I wouldn't be here presenting them without them. Also, I want to acknowledge the help of the many people, partners, resource managers, collaborators that helped me get the data that I needed, that helped me get the insights that I needed to shape this project. Melissa was mentioning the efforts, the relational effort in data collection. Prior to starting this project, for example, well, before data collection, I had about 59 meetings, Zoom meetings with folks from land trusts, from tribes, from federal agencies, state agencies. presenting, to share, to inform them about the project, hearing from them whether they think this was useful, and ask for their support in sharing in the file, the data, the plans that they have, or introduce me or put me in contact with someone that might have the important data for this project. So today I'll be sharing some insights of our first synthesis project, titled as Assessment of Adaptation Plans and Practice for Natural and Cultural Resources. The broader goal of the project was understanding the state of climate adaptation practices in sectors related to resource management and conservation in the Midwest. Now I just click here. Okay. So to frame the discussion, we all know that climate change most of the time sucks. It already affecting our natural and cultural resources, and it's impact our livelihoods, often in unfair and inequitable ways. One of the biggest challenges is that climate change changes the world as we know it, so in fast. So many of our current practices aren't the best fit anymore, and our institutions are struggling to keep up and build the capacity to adapt. But adaptation work is happening. We know this in the natural and cultural resource community, and that's where this project comes in. We wanted to better understand how key natural and cultural resource managers across the Midwest regions are engaged with adaptation work. And our approach was to learn from natural and cultural resources management plans and also climate resource-focused climate action and climate adaptation plans from the key managers from the 8 states that comprise the Midwest CASC region. But adaptation, like conservation, isn't something that any single institution or sector can tackle alone. Collaboration across jurisdiction is essential. Natural systems, wildlife does not follow political and administrative boundaries. So when efforts are fragmented or uncoordinated, they represent missing opportunities. They present opportunity actually for waste resources and even lead to maladaptive outcomes. So it is important to have a cross-jurisdictional assessment of adaptation planning, but this type of assessment is very challenging. And I will talk a little bit about those challenges during the presentation. So with that in mind, we also sought to understand how, well, our first question, how our natural and cultural resource managers are planning to respond to climate change, and how do they align focus and what opportunity, and reflect on the opportunities that exist for advancing adaptation outcomes in the Midwest region to collective action. I will go very briefly on how we went about to get, derive the insights to answer those questions. I don't want to make this a very technical presentation, but I'm happy to answer your questions about this at the end. But as I said in the beginning, we focus on planning documents. We want to learn from those plans what kind of actions they are planning, or they're carrying out on the ground. So we began by compiling a data set of 955 natural resource management and climate plans from 5 key types of land managers. We focus primarily on agencies with a strong focus in fish and wildlife and natural resource. Those include like federal agencies like USGS Fish and Wildlife Service, the Forest Service, national parks, state agencies like DNRs mostly, and also land trusts and tribal governments. But we also included county government. And the reason for this is that they are an important land manager in this region. But for this specific group, we could not find natural resource focused plan. So we relied on multi-sectoral plan that had relevant content to natural resource management. So we looked at those, we reviewed those 900 55 plans and try to identify how many were climate informed plan, what are those that had climate change discussions in relation to natural resource management. So out of the 955, we ended up with 171 plans. So about 18% of the total. And then from those 171 plans, I extracted 50,653 management goals and reviewed those. From this total, 1,951 is about 13% were adaptation actions. The adaptation actions are those that were explicitly labeled, mentioned as so in the documents. Just a very few documents, the one that I was, that was directly, it was not publicly available, they're mostly from Land Trust. They told me, you know, you won't find too much about climate change here, but this is it was a climate adaptation effort. So with the exception of those, all of other, this set of actions that I'm labeling adaptation actions were actions that within the documents were explicitly labeled or mentioned as adaptation. So how we go about to analyze 15,000 texts now? By text me statements that what I'm referring to as a climate informed actions. I used a technique called BERT topic. This is a natural language processing technique that the goal is to extract latent topics from text. It uses something called embeddings, and I don't want to go into too much detail here, but what you need to know is that and I'm going to show you a brief, I won't go into detail here, just so you have a broad, like, you know, an idea of how it works. It works by transforming text, more precisely each word or from a text, so each token from a text, into a numerical value. So it transforms text into numbers, and those numbers carry the meaning of that text. So it is able to identify that Queen, the monarch, is different than Queen, the band, because the numbers carry the meaning within the context. What this allows me to do is first cluster, analyze those 50,000 documents based on their meanings, find clustering. So this is the first part. The embeddings capture the numerical meaning of the text. A cluster text that has similar meaning, and then goes to a bunch of, you know, very technical stuff. But from those clusters, extracts the most representative keywords for that cluster. And with that keyword, that, you know, those keywords have, you know, groups or centered in a theme that is focused on a meaning. Just so you have very briefly understand how it's done. And so from the cluster, from the topic, I then identified, I linked to a management actions. So this is an example. This is what we get from a BERT topic. Each of those points is one adaptation, climate informed action extracted from the plan. And then you see the clusters, right? The colored clustered. So I know that this orange one, this is the topic that was given to me. And then it gives me like a set of keywords related to those documents. And then I can quickly understand that. What is this about? It's invasive species, but not only invasive species management, but that this cluster, this set of documents is about invasive species control by just reading those keywords. So this was the first level. This is not perfect, especially with the data set of 50,000 documents. This technique is very powerful for very large corpora. It worked well, but it required manual review. And I did this and reassigned some documents for cluster that I thought it was more, it was more meaningful within the context of natural resource management and the goal of this study. Okay, so now I'm gonna present the insights from this analysis. And the first one is that managers are embedding adaptation work in a diverse set of management practices, creating a rich and varied landscape of climate adaptation action in the Midwest. So the bird topic gave me 60 topics. I then refined those to 30. So from our analysis, I got 30 distinct management practices, and those forms a kind of a domain map of how adaptation is potentially, how adaptation is happening in this region. But I know it is important to know that does not mean that adaptation is only happening through this practice. And I will talk a little bit in a minute about this. But those are some examples of the key management practices that were presented in those plans. A lot about wildlife monitoring and research, a lot about grasslands and savanna with specific focus on seed mixes and guarantee that we have a diverse set of seeds for restorations. We have also focused on forest stand improvement. And here we have also a management practice of forest stand improvement. Here with the focus on diversifying the structure of the stand, so increasing diversity, but also structural diversity, presented hatches with different age, so sectional stages. And I would assume I could stay like 30 minutes speaking about each one of those. But just to have an idea of the different types, you have wildlife, you have grasslands, forests, and you have different flavors or different aspects of how those actions are, how those practices are being, how they're engaging with those practices. So those are more like domain or maybe conservation target specific practices, but we also have cross-cutting practices. For example, community engagement and outreach and partnerships, invasive species control, prescribed fire and disturbance-based management, adaptive management and adaptive planning, and a few others like land acquisition, type consultation and engagement, and others that you can see here. Then I asked myself, what is the most common one in terms of, so what I found is, thinking about considering a raw number, raw count, community engagement, outreach, and partnership was the most, was the actions that was not most frequent, but we had it the most. Then followed by wildlife monitoring research, wildlife habitat management. Habitat management, you see here providing habitat for wildlife, or also managing for shelter and reproduction, so nests like snags and cavities and things like this. It was very interesting engaging with this with the studies as a conservation social scientist, by the way. I learned a lot about wildlife. So then we have invasive species control. So this is the broadly distribution of managed practice in terms of raw counts of actions. We also I asked myself, we then look what are the most common planning practice by actions, and then we find that as planning becomes more, actually, I was also interested in knowing whether this full set of climate-informed actions different of the adaptation actions. So when you think about those two groups, adaptation actions and climate-informed actions, those climate-informed, like most of the data set, they are not adaptation. Do they have the same profile? So basically, when they are doing explicitly adaptation, are they doing the same thing? It's not adaptation. And here is what I found: as planning become more adaptation focused, we see a shift of focus towards water-related actions, while top management practices still remain a priority. So this is also a lot to digest, but as you can see, community engagement, wildlife monitoring research still is like top priority. But then we see a shift in here. I'm sorry, this is a proportion of planned actions normalized by each group. So normalized by adaptation, normalized by climate-informed practice. And here we have the management, the 10 most frequent management practices. And then you see that management practices that are top priorities still remain top priority. But then we see some shifts in water quality becoming more focused within this set of adaptation practices. We also see less focus on wildlife habitat management. And of course, we see climate change adaptation, but this is obvious. It wouldn't show up in the next one, or in the climate informed, because it would be classified as climate adaptation. So based on this, my next thought was, well, how do those actions, adaptation actions, how each manager group, as I mentioned at the beginning, federal agencies, state agencies, tribes, county agencies. For this analysis, I removed land trust because it was very few data and very spotty data, so it was not helping to find like patterns. But for those four, how they are engaging with those top management practices. And what I found that the overlap and difference in top management practice point to natural bridges for collaboration and also shared learning among managers. So here is what I found. When you see like county has a very different profile. This is a proportion of planned action, adaptation planned actions. So what you see here is a profile of adaptation practices. Clearly, county has a very different profile on how they are engaging with adaptation work, which reflects mostly the documents, their mandates, right? They are really a government unit very close to the community and answering to more, a lot of influence of urban communities. So you see barely nothing related to wildlife monitoring research. And also another point that I want to make before I go to the insights here is the proportion of adaptation actions normalized by group. So what you see here is from all federal actions, wildlife monitoring is about 20%, for example. So sometimes you don't see anything here, but it might be the reflection that there's so few of them that in the proportion doesn't show up. But in the case, so you see, like in the case of county, you rarely see wildlife monitoring. You see a lot of engagement partnership, and there's also those are significant relationships. And for states, you see a lot of emphasis in invasive species control. For tribes, you have a strong emphasis in wildlife population management. And by wildlife population management are the actions like really directly managing wildlife, management reproduction, management biological interactions, predator-prey interactions, these kind of things. Then I was thinking this was insightful, but what if I had a closer look of the top 5 management practices? So you see a lot of commonalities, but also differences. Very clearly, you see more relations, you see more connections in terms of practice across those 3 groups. Although like the percentage or proportion that use those actions shows up in the goals in their adaptation actions differ. Across the board, community engagement still remains as a top action across those adaptation practices. But you see how it varies in terms of where it falls in the proportion in this like top 5 proportion priorities. And clearly, you see that county is pretty much isolated in terms of the practice that they most often approach. How are we in time?
You're at 3:30.
Okay.
Yes.
Alrighty. So what does this tell me? We see opportunities to work together, but we also see opportunity for learning, right? we see opportunity to join efforts with wildlife monitoring. Monitoring is something that's very expensive, but those manager groups are doing already. I have no idea if they are though sharing those information, and I couldn't find this in the documents. And we see opportunities also to engage much more with county or find connections with county. The next insight that I bring to you, it's is that for the next part, so I got this, and then for the next part, I wanted to understand how climate informed actions are being pursued collaboratively. So what I did was I subsetted the set of planned actions that contained references to partnerships. So a lot of actions that involve like working with those agencies or partnering with local community or developing a partnerships with this and that organization. So I subsetted a set of actions, planned actions from those full 5,000 or 50,000 goal actions, those that mentioned partnerships. And then I developed a named entity recognition pipeline. I won't go also in super detail, but what you need to know is that this method allows you to review a text and extract entities. Entities means like organizations, name of people, places, and such. So for this study, I trained a pipeline to identify name of organizations or groups or people like partners, stakeholders, foresters, landowners, and then create a data set that showed like for each plan, for each actions, for each group, what are the organizations or groups that they are engaged with when they are planning for partnerships or through partnerships. And then I plot this. And then by what I learned was that in pursuing the plan adaptation actions, managers relied on diverse groups of partners, some notably more frequent than others, so revealing strengths to build on, but also collaborations to strengthen to advance adaptation together. And I'm gonna show you how where this insight came from. This is a network representation of this data set that I mentioned to you. In the center, you see each of these 4 manager groups, so federal, tribe, state, and county. At the edge, you see categories of partners that I found in the groups. So some were academic research institutions, federal agencies, states, community groups, local government, and so on. And then I mapped those connections. You see blue lines and orange lines. Blue lines represent those connections that are statistically significant above the average, and orange line below the average for that particular group. But when interpreting this, so you see a lot of connections. The connections are there. Some are stronger than others, but they are there. So this is what I said, why I was referring to a diverse set of connections, a diverse set of partners group and their connections. But there are some interesting things. When you see community groups and volunteers, you see that a lot of blue lines and like thicker blue lines converging to this. So it shows that, for all of this is a group that is partnering with all of them, all of those key land manager groups. And when you see state government, you also see 3 blue lines that were, that are a little bit like, so it also shows, they also show that there is a lot, there's the partner, a partner group that are engaging with all of those main key agencies or key natural resource managers from this region. You also see some other interesting patterns, academic and research institutions. There is connection, but not very strong connections. So it tells me that although the connections are there, it's not as, within this data set is not, it's more than the average for that specific group. And then this is across all of the groups. That makes sense. All right, to wrap this up, I want just to emphasize the key takeaways. One is that managers are embedding adaptation work in a diverse set of management practices in creating a rich and varied landscape of climate adaptation actions in the Midwest. Then as planning becomes more adaptation focused, we see a shift in focus toward water-related actions, while top management priorities remain still there. The overlap and differences in top management practice point to natural bridges for collaboration, and also in pursuing their plans, managers rely on diverse groups of partners, some notably more frequent than others. Those are strong insights, but I want you to keep in mind that there is a lot of limitations in how to interpret it. This is not generalizable for the region, but it can be transferable. And the reason for this is the data set is highly unbalanced. For federal and state agencies, it's better because we focus on refuge and national parks and national forests. And I was able to do a systematic approach of looking for all of the comprehensive conservation plans, all the main plans from those units. But when you go to county, there is about 700 to 900 counties in this region. It's really hard to, I was able to get 250 documents. It's called County Comprehensive Plan, 250 from this group. I also was able to collect about 200 focus on outdoor recreational plan for counties, but it's still 200 out of 700, 900 plans. For land trust, I only had like 6 plans from 3 land trusts. This is why I included in a qualitative analysis, which is the topic exploration, but I excluded when I was doing the comparative analysis. And for tribes, it's also not representative, right? I had about 8 documents from tribes that authored by 15 tribes collectively, and those are mostly tribes located in the Lake Superior region. So when you heard me saying tribes, states, federal, keep in mind that this is not representative, or well, I don't know, but probably not representative of how those actually groups are doing or engaging with adaptation work. But it offers a baseline framework that we can build on and advance from here. As we get more data, as more adaptation plans or more natural resource management plans, the swaps are coming up soon, are produced and put out there, we can update this data set and increase also our efforts to gather different plans from different groups within those 3 plans from different partners, the different managers within those 5 manager groups. And this is so important. Why? One of the biggest challenges of adaptation is tracking whether we are able to accomplish our goals over time. There is not much out there of a strong database that allows us to keep track of what we are planning to do and what we are achieving. Planned actions does not 100% translate into on-the-ground actions, but it provides us with a starting point. And also from those documents, those are management, but also policy documents. Those agencies, specifically government agencies, are publicly committing to developing those actions. So keeping a database like this that can be continuously update is also a tool for accountability. And with using tools and methods like the bird topic, it's very easy to update the database and get real-time insights without without so much heavy lifting in manual review. As we increase the number of actions, this model become more powerful and be able to capture the nuances of different types of management practices and adaptation. So I see a lot of opportunities to this, and I hope that, as I have been telling everyone, I hope that this data set, 955 plans, with 171 plans, with 15,000 adaptation actions can be out. It will be out there, and people will use it because it was a lot of work. And I don't want to see this being in a repository or lost somewhere. Our choice with this assessment was a broad level assessment. As I said in the beginning, I could go, for each of those management practices, I could stop and talk each one of them for 30 minutes, 1 hour, because there are many facets of how they approach adaptation. As I mentioned in the beginning, before standing improvement, there is a strong focus on increasing diversity, structural diversity across the landscape. One thing that I'm really interested in is wildlife monitoring research is one of the second more important topics within the data set. What they want to know, what they are monitoring, what kinds of research questions can we extract from there that can inform us researchers to better provide information that can help this. I could do this, you all could do this. If you want to do this, I'll give you the data set, after clearing with Melissa and Jessica. Disclaimer. But there is so much to explore in each of those. And I want to thank you again, you all. And I want to thank you, the working group, Melissa, Jessica, and others. And I'm happy to take your questions.